Cruz is in the Redwoods, about 70-ish miles south of San Francisco. I probably butchered the distance a bit. The drive to get from San Jose to Santa Cruz is the worst. The 17 is awful. We, as Santa Cruzians, as you can see, have the most terrifying mascot of all time. We have the banana slug, a mascot chosen because they wanted the least threatening animal humanly possible. The UC system also has a mascot for, I believe, Irvine, which is an anteater. So the UC system rocks for choosing mascots. Whilst I was studying abroad in Santa Cruz, it was, first of all, my first opportunity to sit there and realize, oh, as an international student, if I don't hit certain grade boundaries and everything, I can have my visa taken away from me. That's not something you have when you're, don't have any of those requirements. And it gave me a very different appreciation for what education means and what we're doing in any of this. It was also my first taste for the American education system. It is extremely different to the British version of what we do. It was also my first interaction with this little thing called first year English, that when my housemates were saying they were taking English classes, I was honestly quite mocking of it, and I was like, but you're adults, why are you doing this high school stuff? I've now been teaching first year English for almost a decade, and I can't see myself doing anything else. First year English utterly rocks, and more university systems need a version of it at the end of the day. The American system is one of the honestly few international systems that really cares about people's writing, and it's fantastic and important. Whilst I was studying abroad in Santa Cruz, I was on a J1 visa, so I wasn't allowed to work. J1s might have changed now, I can't remember. I wasn't allowed to work, but I was allowed to do internships. So I interned in our college newspaper, and I was so excited because I was like, this is it, this is my foot in the door, journalism all the way. I did it for one semester and never want to work on a newspaper again in my life because I hated every single second of it. I'm really happy I had that opportunity though, because I can guarantee had I not done that, I probably would have gone into a master's degree trying to go in that direction. It was a very quick discovery to go, okay, I actually don't like this thing. So I guess piece of advice, Mark 1, if there is something that you are interested in doing that either could be something you're interested in doing in the future or could just be something that you're like, oh, this could be fun. If you have a low-level way of trying it out on campus, I heavily, heavily, heavily recommend trying it, because it could be something that you sit there and go, oh my god, I just discovered my future career. Or it could be something that in doing it in a low-key version, you've just saved yourself 10 years of stress of doing something you utterly detest. So heavily recommend take those opportunities that vaguely interest you just to see where they could lead. I finished my undergrad. I liked the American education system. I thought it was honestly just a bit more freeing than the UK version. And I wanted to study abroad just one last time, for just 2 years. And I told my entire family it would just be the 2 years and I would get out. I would love to say that I chose Poly for any amazing academic reason. My girlfriend I met in Santa Cruz lived 2 hours up the road from there, and it looked pretty. Had I not gone to Poly, my life would have gone in a very, 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 very different direction for a lot of different reasons. So whilst I was at Poly, I was on an F1 student visa, which then did allow me to work, but it was my first encounter with only being allowed to work 20 hours a week, which, if anyone's on a student visa, welcome. The first position, we do not have writing centres in the UK, or at least when I was there, we did not have writing centres in the UK. I think some universities like Coventry are now starting to add some, which is really cool. I did it because I quite like the idea of just working with students a little bit more. At this point, I did not have any interest in going into education. I thought I would like to maybe do a PhD, but I didn't know what in the slightest bit, and I went into the Writer Centre stuff, partially because, to be frankly honest, it was on-campus employment that I could legally do as an international student. I I ended up working the Writing Center. Every single semester I was a student there, even though for other stuff I did, strictly speaking, I only had to do one semester. It is also, I feel I should say, where I met my wife. She was not a student I was working with in there, because that would feel really fucking weird. She was one of the other Writing Center employees. She also, when she then went into her teaching credential program, decided to use my class as, like, the class to basically shadow and see how she felt about teaching. And when one of my students was like, oh my god, you're dating someone in this class, I was like, no, not dating an undergrad in this class. I am dating someone who is getting their master's degree right now. Very, very, very different. Because of working in the Writing Center, I was like, okay, I really like this working with students, and I'd like to try a bigger version of it. So I applied for the university's teaching pool, which you basically had to have I think it was a 3.75 GPA, multiple letters of interest, having had worked in the Writing Center, and typically speaking, it was very much trial by fire thing. I in no way had a good enough GPA for it. Like, I think I had like a 3.0 GPA at that point because my first semester in California was just bad. The head of the writing program said she'd give me a one-off opportunity to try it. She was like, look, you seem interested in it, and to be frankly honest, we need teachers. Have a go. It'll probably just be a one-off thing. I ended up teaching, I believe, 12 sections at that university over a 3-year period, and ended up doing a degree purely focused in teaching because it was very much a found my calling type moment. So I guess, like, piece of advice Mark II, if there is something that you're interested in doing and there is a university requirement that is potentially getting in the way, in this case, it was GPA. In research work, which I'll get to in amount of time, it was the fact that they wanted a linguist, and I am not a linguist. If you are genuinely interested, reach out to the people who are setting that stuff up. You might be able to find a backdoor way into working on those things, or there might be an adjacent project that those people are working on that you might be able to end up becoming part of. I'm not saying it is always going to work out in your favor. To be frankly honest, a lot of the time it doesn't work out in your favor, but it is worth giving it a shot at the end of the day. Anyway, so I was supposed to be at Poly for 2 years and ended up switching to an OPT visa, which I cannot remember what OPT stands for at this point, but I ended up switching to an OPT visa, which is basically a student work visa, for my last year there. I taught full-time at Poly. I loved every single second of it, and whilst I was doing this, I said, right, this is it. I'm gonna get a PhD. I wanna get a PhD in probably this composition thing that I'm teaching, but I don't really know what direction, and I wanna get my PhD back home in the UK. I've been gone for too long, it's time for me to go back. And my girlfriend, now wife, said, can we just do one more thing in the States? Like, I'm not quite ready to leave America yet. So I said, yeah, like, you know, that's fine. Like, if you want to stay here, like, I'm very happy to stay in California. And she's like, no, we're gonna get out of California. Like, I do not want to be in California anymore. She's literally Californian. I don't want to be in California anymore, anywhere but California. And I slightly sarcastically said, well, South Carolina's quite a long way from here. She was like, yeah, go on then, apply there. So we've now lived here for 6 years, and we now own a house here and both have full-time jobs here. So doing something on a almost I dare you to do it thing doesn't always go the way that you think it's going to. So when I came here, and it's so absurd how different this went. When I came here, I was supposed to study popular culture. I was supposed to study the ways in which we can interact with pop culture in the classroom to basically help students coming from different backgrounds like get into academia at the end of the day, for want of better expression. I was also supposed to be working with assessment theory and basically how do we change grading practices, how do we change any of these things. I did absolutely none of that in my PhD. Instead, one day I was in one of our classes, like history of composition class, and our instructor, Baron Hawke, who ended up being on my DIS committee, he was talking about British composition and British education, and I asked him a question about it, and I was like, oh, can you tell me more about that? And he said, I don't know, can you tell me more about it? And he didn't know the answer, and I was like, oh, I'll just do my little, 1 semester long research project on that, and that random project ended up becoming my entire dissertation. And I accidentally co-invented a subfield of composition studies, which I didn't really intend to do at all. I did not mean to be a historian when I came here. I think when you love something, it's quite hard to just, keep that down. So I guess, piece of slightly random advice, part 3, part 4, whatever we made it to. When you are headed towards, and I'm just assuming y'all are masters/PhD students. Are you master's students, PhD students? Nods? Yeah. When you're heading towards, thesis-y stuff, DIS-y type stuff, whatever it is that y'all do in your various programs, or indeed, you've already done. Just because you once said, hey, university, this is what I want to do with this, you shouldn't feel shoehorned into doing that one thing. We have to do, and I don't know if, and you might be able to tell me what it's called, Michelle, because literally yesterday I could not think what it's called. In humanities, we have to do this document in our second year. It's like a program, it's like the program study form, but it goes with that. And it's basically a document that we're it's a 10-page document. It says, this is what I'm going to do. These are the courses I'm going to take. This is everything. It's supposed to steer you on that track. My end-up path is almost the opposite to what I'd said I was going to work on there. Apart from, slightly weirdly, the 4 people I hypothetically said would be my committee ended up being my committee. But again, some departments have different rules, but unless you are extremely stuck into going down one particular road, it's okay to change your mind in academia at the end of the day, especially if you're working on a dissertation. That is multiple years of your life, so be interested in what you're working this thing on. For my dissertation, I basically wrote the history of writing studies in the UK and how it then directly impacted the States. And it was interesting. I met some interesting people along the way. As a grad student, I taught 18 sections at this university as instructor of record. In that time, I taught around, and I worked it out the other day, and it mildly depressed me. In that time, I taught 427 students. The classes I teach are all limited to either 19 people or 24 people. I say this, A, because I was like, wow, that's actually quite a lot of people over a 6-year period. I say this because I think people sometimes forget the sheer amount of labor that's taken out of graduate students at times and the sheer amount of stuff that we ended up doing. I think some people have this slight hesitancy, especially when they go on the job market and stuff, to really forefront the work they did as a graduate student because, oh, it was just part of my degree. Yo, you're working at the end of the day. Really big up the things you're doing as students. It's really, really, really important. So in my time as a teacher, I taught a singular section of English 101, and it was a utter disaster. I taught 8 regular sections of English 102. I taught 6 sections of English 463, and I taught 3 different capstone English 102 sections, which are themed classes and capstone rocks. I taught a class on political satire, I taught a class on horror and pop culture, and I taught a class on human rights and language rights globally. Something which has very much now impacted me. Now I am a full-time faculty member, but we will get there again in a couple of minutes. I think the biggest thing I did, though, as a grad student I was one of the assistant directors for English 102 for a 2-year period. I did not know that this was an opportunity that existed. Like, I knew multiple people who, when they came here, were like, oh, I chose my program because I might get a chance to do that. I had no idea that being an AD was a thing that I could do as a student. It basically meant that for a 2-year period, I was one of 3-4 people who was in charge of every single standard syllabus that goes out to English 102, which is roughly 100 different sections every semester. I was co-editing and co-writing our textbook that is used by multiple thousands of students every semester. And on what can only be described as the funnest weekend of all time, I was assistant director when we all skipped away for spring break in 2020 and sat there and we're like, oh, spring break, this is fun. Oh, 2 weeks spring break, this is terrifying, but our students are quite happy. Oh no, the university doesn't actually exist anymore, everything is what are we going to do with ourselves? I was one of 3 people who had any even vague training in online teaching, who had to basically get every single possible section of English 101 and 102 online in a 5-day period, and online for the rest of the semester. And I will just say this right now, I don't know if Casey, is Casey here today?
Yes.
I haven't seen him. It's very rude. Had I not, say this loud enough for him to potentially hear, had I not taken Casey Carroll's teaching online for graduate students, I could not have done that shift. The reason our department had a genuinely very good shifter online were because there were 3 of us that had done a lot of CTE courses and actually had the training to do it at the end of the day. The actual director for English that time had not done any of the online stuff. It was us students who had that experience. So y'all, CTE utterly rocks. You can get some really, really helpful stuff out of this, and that is the end of me plugging things. With the assistant director position, it was the utter epitome of, I didn't know that this thing existed. I didn't know it was something that I even particularly wanted to do. I didn't know really what it would entail at first, other than once I applied for it. It is the epitome to me of, if there is an opportunity, again, that vaguely interests you, heavily recommend fight to get it at the end of the day. The first time I went up for an AD position was at the end of my first year, and I was denied because they were like, bruh, you have 1 year of teaching experience here. This doesn't really make that much sense. So I went up for it again the next year and honestly got it pretty immediately. The experience that I got in that position is the type of experience that, as a now full-time faculty member, I potentially might not end up getting in a decade at the end of the day. And I got that as a 2-year period as a grad student. Yes, there is definitely a lot of work involved in some of these things, but I truly believe it's part of the reason why I was hired straight away once I finished my PhD, were because I was fighting for these different experiences. And then on completely different note, research assistanting. I am the epitome of was, when I was a grad student, was the epitome of a grad student who teaching was why I did what I did. I love teaching. I find extreme joy in teaching. Teaching is fun. This is fun. Teaching is good. I don't actually like research very much. I am not a researcher in any particular way. I enjoyed doing my dissertation because it was a little niche topic that I happily did, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that eventually. But I never really considered myself to be a quote-unquote researcher. In fall 2020, an email went out on the listserv that I don't even know was supposed to go to the English listserv, or if it was supposed to just be for the linguistic side of things. An email went out and it was saying, hey, we're looking for a research assistant to help with this project that we're trying to get off the ground. And first of all, I sat there and I was like, oh, I don't do research, like, even though I'm literally a PhD student. I don't really do research, like, I just want to be doing more teaching. But as an international student, there are only finite ways to make money at the end of the day. And I had a 5-hour slot that existed in my 20 hours a week. So I was like, you know what? I may as well just apply for this thing. At worst, I get rejected for it. So I applied for it, and the two people who run it, Mike Gavin, Stan Dubinsky. Mike was my WPA for my second year of writing program administrator, my second year of being assistant director. Stan was someone that my wife knew through her master's degree, and I emailed them, and they were like, we're really sorry, we're just looking for linguists for this. Like, you're not, like, it's not that we don't want you, it's just not what the direction we're going for with this. So I emailed back, and I was like, yo, like, this just seems really interesting, like, 100% understand, like, no hard feelings at all, please keep me updated, blah, 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 blah. And they were like, oh, you actually are genuinely interested. You're not just asking because you're trying to get a paycheck. And I was like, no, it seems like a really cool project. So they said, you know what? Screw it. Let's just, like, hire a English person instead of a linguist. I think they hired a linguist as well the next semester. Let's hire an English person, just see how this thing goes. So this is the Language Conflict Project. It is a U of SC thing at the end of the day, created by Mike and Stan. It's basically tracking all of the different, like, global language conflicts that are going on at any given moment. It's a really chill project, and my favorite thing about it is that we get a lot of undergrad students involved in it, and they're writing things for this encyclopedia. In fall 2020, I was hired on to basically be a guinea pig for this thing called the Language Freedom Index, which is basically using different metrics to sit there and determine how much danger a language is in its given country. And as I was doing this thing, I was like, oh, I don't like the wording of this, and I don't like the wording of this, and I don't like this, and I don't like this. And without really meaning to, I ended up redeveloping almost the entire Language Freedom Index as we went on. And I was like, oh dear, that was a bad call, I shouldn't have done that. And Mike and Stan were like, oh no, this actually works really nicely. So I was like, yay, I did research, this was fun. In summer 2021, I guess, like, as I assume everyone here knows, but as international students, we're allowed to work 40 hours in the summer, not the 20. But without getting, like, internship shenanigans going on, it still has to be connected to on-campus work, which, at the end of the day, especially for grad students, can be surprisingly few and far between. So Mike and Stan said, hey, we basically want someone to copy edit, like, the entries for this thing. Would you like to do some of that? So I was like, yeah, cool. Like, I'll do a little bit more on this project. It's fun. They then said, hey, now you've actually done this for a while, we want to have a capstone 102 section that's basically introducing students into language conflict. As you always make such a big point about being a teacher, not a researcher, would you like to do that instead? I was like, yes, I would. That sounds fantastic. So, out of nowhere, I suddenly had a theme section last fall that I wouldn't have even known existed otherwise. That then directly led in the spring to them saying, hey, do you want to be research assistant? One last time, just extend your work on the LFI so that when we're taking this to conferences this summer, we'll just have more data to use with it. And I was like, yep, that sounds fantastic. Again, as an international student, very, very thankful to be given opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have been there. They then, in the summer, said, hey, as you're going to be a summer graduate, we can pay you one last time. As this is your last ride, do whatever you want. So for reasons that I do not quite understand, I decided it would be a useful idea, and it was a useful idea. I decided it would be a quick idea to make a list of every single country on the entire planet, and then research every single language in every single country that's spoken by more than 1% of their population, which ends up being thousands and thousands and thousands of languages worldwide, and quite a lot of these languages you can only find by doing these deep dives into census data and stuff, which can be really hard to find. As I was doing this, I was like, wow, this is really fun, and that was the moment I was like, oh shit, research is actually really fun. Like, I actually like this research that I'm doing here, that ultimately only really began as something that was, wow, I'm getting way too loud for this mic, sorry. It's something that, I get excited, y'all. It was something that ultimately only began as a, hey, this seems vaguely interested. It was sent to me on a listserv. What could I potentially do with this to help out? So that then brings me to now. First of all, I guess start at the bottom. I am now the co-PI, which I can never remember what PI stands for on grants.
Principal Investigator.
Principal Investigator, thank you, Michelle. I am now the co-Principal Investigator on our Aspire grant for the Language Conflict Project, which is something that you don't normally step straight out of a graduate degree to being part of. It's literally because I sat there and I hunted down these research positions at the end of the day. This semester, in my first semester as a full-time faculty person, I am teaching Horror and Pop Culture Regular 101. The reason that I'm able to in college is because I put in multiple applications throughout my time here to teach courses for the capstone college, and they were like, oh cool, you actually really like doing this. Again, it's not something you're doing for like a little bit of a pay bump. I am also teaching human rights and language rights for both the Honors College, which is really, really fun, and for Maxi at International College. This is actually a pilot program and is, I believe, the first time a specific English 101, 102 has been created exclusively for Maxi. So I'm basically getting to pilot this whole new version of 101, 102, again, purely because I decided to respond to something on a listserv that seemed vaguely interesting. So I guess final piece of advice off the top of my head, really, listservs are your friends. I spent such a long time as a student just deleting every single listserv email and debating, like, taking myself off of them. And part of the only reason I ever kept myself on them was I was like, oh, it's useful to have, like, updates of when, like, the building's going to be shut and things like this. Every opportunity I've had at this specific university came about because I paid attention to things on listservs. The only reason I fell into CTE stuff in the first place was because teaching online for graduate students was being advertised in our listserv, and I was like, that was really great. Now I should do more certificates, and I've now like become like god of certification. Y'all have like gone and created more certificates since I finished, which is sad, but like, I only started becoming involved with CTE because I paid attention to the listservs. I only discovered what is now very rapidly becoming my core research focus as an academic because of listening to the listservs. And like skate back to when I was a master's student, I only actually tried working in a writing center, which led me to becoming a teacher in the first place because I was listening to the listservs at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, the only reason I am any of the things that I am now as a faculty member is because of listening to listservs. And then when someone says, oh, for whatever reason, you aren't the right fit for this, replying and saying, cool, what could I potentially be the right fit for? And not just sitting there and going, cool, peace out, thanks for your time. So if something interests you, fight for it. It can take you to really useful places at the end of the day. Questions?
If you have PowerPoint, a PowerPoint presentation, you want the font size to be at least 24-point font size. The most accessible